Chapter 4 The End and Its Beginning. Rich found himself once again in a totally different place from where he started. But this time he was awake and aware, and everything was crystal clear. He was standing in an empty lot, no grass or trees, just dirt. He called out to see if there was anyone to answer.
Hello! Where am I?
The whispering voice of the Enderman replied, wavering in his mind.
I have created a link to your mind, a way to encompass the entirety of the story. Limiting it to your mind or your ears to comprehend on their own was insufficient.
In the distance, Rich spotted movement. Over the ridge, a small group of players appeared, trudging over the dry ground. The voice of the Enderman spoke again, narrating the scene as it played out.
The world was dying. There were no trees, no animals, and little water. Players had only survived with the few crops they could grow on the dead dirt using the small pools of water they could find.
Rich watched the group of players. It consisted of a few families, parents and children, but there was no laughter or smiles even among the small children. They looked resigned and weary. As one, they halted for a rest, and half of them collapsed from exhaustion. A few of the adults passed out bread, dry and flaky. The children eagerly grabbed their share and started munching, the crust crunching with every bite. The sight of these players struggling so badly made Rich glad he only had to fight a mutant Enderman. Presumably, this group had been wandering this way for years, traveling from waterhole to waterhole.
This is just one example of the many struggles around the failing world.
The whispered voice sounding sad and older than ever.
Many never found a place to stay.
The world around Rich shifted, spinning as time passed. He watched as lava from deep underground bubbled up through the dirt and stone to the surface. For a short while, snow fell, even on the hottest parts of the world, and then water became too scarce for even that. The air thinned and it grew colder and colder. The lava cooled, turning into obsidian, and the dirt wore away, leaving pillars of the black stone behind. The bare stone, left over slowly, began to whiten and bleach in the constant sun. And then time slowed again. The world around him had transformed from a dirt wasteland to a place remarkably familiar. The end, but with a sun still in the sky, shining dimly over the stone. The world that remained was frozen, with air so thin he could barely breathe.
The world was desolate. No one could survive for long.
Rich heard a mental sigh.
But there was one group that lasted longer than any other.
A small troop, no more than 12 people, faded into the scene. They sat in the center of a rough ring comprised of obsidian pillars. They huddled together, frozen and starved. There were only 2 children and no elders. It all seemed hopeless. He watched them pass around a small packet of rations, each taking no more than 1 bite. A bottle of dirty water was distributed similarly. Saddened at the fate these players had to suffer, Rich turned away. He gazed out into the distance, searching for something, anything with life. He found it. As the sun set over the whitened horizon, a shadow crossed it. It was enormous, whatever it was, and it moved with such speed that he only saw it for an instant. The shadow blocked out the sun again, but it was bigger this time, which could only mean one thing. It was getting closer. Apprehensive, Rich peered toward the horizon, searching for the shadow, waiting for it to appear again. A distant roar of triumphant life echoed across the landscape. Overhead, Rich spotted it again, black against the slowly darkening sky. Again the roar sounded, and this time the group heard it. They started standing up and looking around, frantically trying to find the source. From the sky, a force flew down and landed directly in front of the small band of travelers. The ground shook and they fell. They gazed up in fright at what had appeared before them. It was a dragon, black as night, with gray spikes running down its back, and massive wings unfurled and up in the air. It stood staring at the players cowering before it. Folding its wings, it leaned in close, lowering its head down to the player in front. A thought, deep and thundering, pierced Rich's head, and from the way the players cringed and crawled away, they heard it too.
I have awakened from my slumber of millennia, and I find you.
Rich was shocked. This creature could speak?
Tell me, small one, Why are you out wandering in this world that is clearly not friendly to you? I have waited for far too long, waited for the world to grow cold again, so I could break free and live again. But you cannot live here, not for long. I can see your life, and it is leaving you with every breath of this frigid air that you take.
The player that was asked this question tried to find an answer. He was one of the older men from the group, with wrinkles around his eyes, and he wore a coat of some sort of rough cloth. But after a moment of gulping and stuttering, the dragon turned to another for his answer.
Tell me.
She could not find the words either, trembling in the presence of this mighty beast. And so one of the children stepped forward and replied in a clear voice.
We are here because we have nowhere else to go.
Rich heard a voice in his head, softer than the dragon's.
That was my closest friend.
The voice was sad, and Rich, staring at the scene, slowly realized just how old the Enderman was. The dragon focused on the small boy and took one step closer. He leaned in until the tip of his snout was inches away. Every breath from the dragon was filled with ice, and the boy started turning blue. But he held his ground and peered up at the dragon.
You are brave, small one.
The dragon finally decided.
Allow me to lift your plight.
He gazed around at the rest of the players.
I can feed you and give you immunity to the cold, but it will require a transformation. You will no longer be who you once were, in body and power.
A few glances passed between the players who weren't petrified. Finally, the first man who had been questioned stepped forward. He seemed to have regained his courage now that he had seen one of the children speak without being eaten.
What will we have to do? You're volunteering this, but I find it a bit hard to believe that it's from the warmth in your heart.
His voice died as the dragon swung its scaly head over towards him.
I might also call you brave, but mostly it must be foolishness. Why deny your only chance to live? Whatever reason you might have for refusing, it is trumped by life.
The dragon reared back his head.
But I will answer your question. All that is required of you is to accompany me in this lonely world, tend to the fruit, and tell me of days gone past.
One by one, Rich saw the light in their eyes change from fear to hope. The decision was almost unanimous. After all, the dragon was right. Even a transformation was better than dying. They nodded and smiled and picked themselves up. It was an inspiring sight. But the original man was still skeptical.
How do we know you won't just eat us? We don't trust monsters we just met.
He folded his arms in defiance. The woman next to him grabbed his arm.
Jacob, he's offering us a way to live. If we can't trust him, we may as well lie down and die. You know we can't survive long with the food we have left and the cold getting worse every night.
She stared him in the eyes.
You've led us faithfully for long enough. You deserve a break.
But as Rich watched, Jacob yanked his arm away. It was clear to him that the belligerent leader didn't want a break. He wanted to keep control over this small group for as long as he could, using any excuse. And by the way the dragon watched the two squabble, Rich could have sworn that it noticed too. Still desperate to be right, Jacob turned and called out to the others.
Who else here thinks this is too good to be true?
A short, rather ugly player stepped up next to him and growled at the others. A thug, perhaps.
The female is right, Jacob.
The man tensed when he heard his name.
The air will only become colder. That is why I have returned from my hibernation.
The dragon looked high into the night sky at the fuzzy stars floating above.
The sun has left you for the last time. There is no more power to fuel it, and the minimal warmth it has provided you will vanish. It will not rise again.
This announcement was met with a gasp. The sun gone? This new revelation made Jacob realize that if he didn't accept the offer, he wouldn't last the night. Slowly, he looked up at the dragon and grunted.
Fine. What do we do?
With a final glance at Jacob, the dragon flew into the sky. It landed on one of the scattered obsidian pillars, then curled up like a cat about to fall asleep. Folding one wing over the top like a blanket, it remained like this for a long time. Enough that the players down below started to mutter, wondering what was going on. But then, from between the gaps left by the arms and legs, shafts of light began to shine, piercing the darkness around. Finally, the dragon stood. From where he stood, Rich focused on the source of the light and spotted a strange purple crystal with unusual runes inscribed on the sides. The dragon leapt down from the pillar and gazed around at the players.
Who shall be the first?
Emboldened by the bravery of his friend, the other child stepped forward. Rich stared in shock when the dragon pounced on him, clutching him between his claws and carrying him high into the sky. They circled around into the pillar, and the dragon released him, dropping the boy a couple feet above the top. He landed roughly, falling to his knees. Shakily, the boy stood and stared into the light of the crystal. Tentatively, he reached out a hand and gently touched the surface of the crystal. At the point of contact, a burst of light flooded out. Only the silhouettes of the boy is visible, and as Rich watched, he stretched and changed. Slowly, the light fades, and left behind is something different. Suddenly, it disappears. It was there, and now it was not. With a small pop, it appears again, this time standing before the rest of the players. The differences from the boy it used to be and what stands before them are immense. Now he stands taller than any of the adults, though his limbs are thinner than either of the children's. His skin was rough and black, with intricate designs flowing over it. He looked up at the others, and Rich sees that his eyes are now violet and shine with a bright light. A voice oh so familiar to Rich spoke into their heads.
I feel warm. My skin is new and strange, but I'm warm.
The voice was odd, and Rich can guess that the boy had never felt true warmth in his lifetime, just cold and less cold.
And the world looks so different now. It's as if I can see the other side. No, the inverse of everything.
With another pop, he disappeared again and reappeared several blocks over.
I can teleport. I can feel the power to move instantly. It's as if I am simply stepping to the side through the space between us.
The dragon lands next to him, and the Ender Boy gazes up.
Thank you.
Silently, Rich watched as one by one every player stepped forward and was transformed. He became detached from the scene, and time sped forward. He watched on as the Endermen grow and build, creating houses and building farms of tall stalk plants with fruit, chorus fruit, growing on them. Slowly, the emptiness before him is transformed into a town with tall buildings that are filled with Endermen. And then the vision faded. Rich dropped once again into the black void. He opened his eyes and found himself sitting on the ledge next to the Enderman, who was staring into the darkness beyond.
I was the first of the Endermen, and I am also the last of the Eldermen, the original 12.
Rich looked up at him.
What happened to the rest?
Years passed, and Jacob and his partner, Caleb, decided to rule the world that had been opened to them. But the only way to accomplish this was to get rid of the dragon. Together, they crept in while it slept, and killed it before it could wake with shards of obsidian.
The Enderman paused, choked up at the reminder of the dragon.
But something about this cruel act changed them. They turned into mutants with incredible powers, but little reasoning. They sought to destroy and rule. In their mind, the Eldermen were a risk. The originals remembered them from before, knew their secrets, could possibly destroy them. So they attacked first. One by one, they hunted down each of the originals. Eventually, one of us had to stand up to them. My friend, the first to speak up, fought back.
The Enderman seemed more distant than ever.
He won.
That's a good thing, right?
Rich asked. But the heaviness in the mental voice of the Enderman said differently.
He beat Jacob after a furious fight, but the result was more terrible than if he had lost. The mutation, the change that had affected Jacob, was passed on to my friend. He became the mutant, barely distinguishable from what Jacob had been before.
That's horrible.
Rich realized just how much more the Enderman had lost. He himself had lost his family and his town. But this Enderman had lost his family and then watched his friend turn into a monster. And then Rich realized, if the friend had turned into the new mutant, was that who Rich had fought? Did he kill this Enderman's companion? Scared to ask, Rich tentatively reached up to touch the Enderman.
I'm sorry.
He didn't know what else to say. The Enderman took a long, nearly silent breath of the cold air.
It is not your burden to have.
Turning back to Rich, he forged onward.
One day, a player just like you appeared in our land. He came from the world before. We know not how, nor do we seek the pathway, for this is our home now. Against our wishes, he attacked one of the mutants. Incredibly, he managed to defeat the weaker one, and he did not change. He gained a portion of the powers of the mutant, but not in the mind. This is how we knew that only a player from the before could safely challenge and even beat the mutants.
Rich could see a shadow of the player that the Enderman once was. His way of speaking was different still, but it wasn't as foreign as it had been before. Speaking of his past had reminded the Enderman of who he used to be.
And then you came. You appeared, just like the other, out of thin air. With little warning and less time to prepare, you managed to destroy the monster that had been plaguing us.
The eyes of the Enderman were filled with fresh wonder.
And somehow, the abilities that you were forced to face were transferred over to you.
What can I do with these powers?
Rich was curious about what he had gained.
Great things.
The Enderman whispered.
You can do great things, Rich Justice, or evil things. Very evil things. That, my friend, is up to you to decide.